jump into the details, the meat and potatoes of the meeting. I will be providing a quick, let's say, housekeeping reminders for everyone. So we want this to be an interactive meeting, but we also want to minimize background noise if you're not speaking. So if you are not actively asking a question or providing a comment or providing presentation notes, we ask that you remain muted to minimize that background noise. So with that, you can provide your comments as noted by unmuting yourself and just saying, hey, I have a comment or I have a question, or you can type it into the chat box and we'll be monitoring that to make sure that your question or comment is incorporated. All right, so with that, we will go ahead and get started. So welcome to our final public meeting for what we are calling the Crawford County Trail Feasibility Study. Casey, if you can advance the next slide. So I'm going to provide a quick project summary for those of you who may be new to our project. So the Northwest Commission has funded this study to develop concepts for various trail extensions or connections within Crawford County, specifically looking at the extension of the Ernst Trail or Sharrow Bailey Connector Trail in the Needville area up to Bicentennial Park, as well as the connection a new connection from Conneaut Lake Borough to Linesville Borough. And essentially looking at those two gap areas and examining barriers that exist and developing concepts to address any issues that may have to better accommodate the pedestrian, bicyclist, active transportation users. So the results of the study ultimately are going to be used to help and facilitate, allow for trail user groups or counties or the municipalities to pursue grant funding and assistance in completing those improvements. That's the ultimate goal for today's project that we're talking about. Next slide, please, Casey. All right, so today we are going to be sharing our final concepts for addressing those gaps and sort of hearing your questions that you may have on the final concepts. So for each area, we're going to walk through what we're looking at there, final concepts that we have, and solicit questions from you. And then we'll end with sort of next steps for the project. Any questions for that before we begin? No questions. All right, we will dive right in then. So Casey, I'm going to take the screen share from you. Deal it here. All right, can everybody see my screen? Thumbs up. If you're in the Hollywood Squares, okay, good deal. So the first project that we're going to be walking through is that Needville extension project, which essentially is an extension of the Ernst/Sharrow Bailey Connector Trail from the end of the trail up into the Meadville area, specifically Bicentennial Park. So what I have on the screen here is the final report. I'm going to just provide a summary of this report and sort of walk through it, but I'll be focusing mainly on those final concepts that we put together. They're sort of towards the end of the report, but I wanted to walk you all through it so that you know what's out here, so that if you are interested once it is finally approved, in taking a look at it, you'll know what is there. So just to sort of walk you through the report itself, we start with a quick introduction of the project, some background information. There's a graphic there. We then go into some information about how the project came together, right? Some of the data collection that was done, some of the stakeholder team involvement, the public involvement, for example, this meeting today. And then we walk through the existing conditions of this place. We've got some maps. We talk about the land use, right? So the trail context for the area, lovely pictures, trail area. We identify some key destination areas, for example, the Kerrtown Community Center, the open green space next to the Hydroblocks parking lot, Bicentennial Park. There's a Meadville Railroad Depot, right? We describe those areas. We also go into detail on the roadway context. So we describe the roadways that are in this, let's say, gap area from the end of the Sharrow Bailey Connector Trail up to Bicentennial Park. So each of those streets has a little description and some pictures. Talk about bridge context, the environmental context, right? The property boundaries, any safety data and observations that we saw. We summarized the public survey results that we went out and asked all of you to provide us feedback for. And then we summarized sort of the findings that we had. And last but not least, those conceptual alternatives, right? This is what everybody probably came for today. So today I'm going to walk you through what the final concepts are for this project. So the project came down to, we had 3 what we're calling short-term concepts, 3 long-term concepts. So the reason that we divide it up in that way, that we know from the City of Meadville's recreational plans that there is an interest in the long term having that trail connection be off-road trail that goes along the river to be a little more scenic and more separated. We know that's the long-term vision, but as you can probably imagine, that long-term vision is going to require some property negotiations. And so what we've done is we've come up with some short-term concepts that may help to fill that gap in the meantime, that could provide a solid connection for active transportation users between that area in the meantime, and then serve as a secondary network after the project. So I'll walk you through the short-term concepts first. The first short-term concept goes from the end, I'll zoom in a little bit here, goes from the end of the trail along Shippen Street, up Pennsylvania Avenue, over the Mercer Street Bridge, along the parking lot, along the railroad line, over the local bridge, and then along Poplar Street and French Street. Now, what facilities are along that section? All of the sections in this light blue turquoise color are Sharrow shared road facilities in this concept. So essentially, you would have pavement markings with Sharrows, you would have share the road signage for these sections. These portions here would be running along the edge of the parking lot and then along a gravel path, running along that old railroad bed and then over the local bridge. So this one, if we're looking at some visuals to go with that, this is what it might look like along Pennsylvania Avenue. You can see those Sharrow pavement markings. You share the road signage to go alongside it. Here's what it might look like on the Mercer Street Bridge, Mercer Street. Right. The second short-term concept, concept B, is the same path, but a slightly different facility type along Pennsylvania Avenue and over Mercer Street Bridge, that area. So this concept has this portion right here, you can see is shown in yellow instead of that turquoisey blue color. And the difference is that instead of having a share the road facility there, this concept has a shoulder bike lane. So what does that mean? It would look like bike lanes on the shoulder leading up to it. We heard in previous public meetings that there were concerns about it being really tight on the bridge. We took a look at it and we had modified this concept design to transition to a shared lane over the bridge so that if there are users who are not comfortable being that close to, let's say, vehicular traffic over the bridge, they can choose to take the exit ramp off onto the sidewalk, walk their bike across, and then jump back on the other side. So that is concept B. All right, the next concept is concept C. This is another short-term concept. You'll see in this picture, it follows the same path as those other two. But once again, the difference is that section on Pennsylvania Avenue and Mercer Street. So in this particular concept, we have what's called a two-way separated bicycle facility. So both of the bicycle lanes are on the right side, or excuse me, the eastern side of the roadway, and there is a painted buffer, as shown here, to separate those bicyclists from vehicular traffic. In addition to that, you can have bollards, some sort of delineator, something, right, to separate, once again, from traffic. These are some visuals that go along with that. All right, so those are the three short-term concepts. Do you have any questions or comments now that I've shared those three concepts with you? Questions from the audience, opening it up here before we dive into the long-term concept. Got a quiet group today. All right, well, in that case, then we'll go ahead and move along to the long-term concept. So as I noted, the long-term vision based on the City of Meadville recreation plans show that the ultimate vision is to have a trail connection that is off-road and along the river. So what does that look like? It looks like from the end of the trail connector along the river, over the Mercer Street Bridge, and then along the river once again, connecting up to Bicentennial Park. So this portion in pink would be a gravel trail facility. There would be a new local bridge right over that mouth of Mill Run, and then it would connect it. So what would it look like? Apologies. So the Mercer Street Bridge, that would be the two-lane on one side of the roadway facility over that. So additional separation, right, to go with that long-term concept. All right. Another long-term concept that we've developed is from the end of the trail going across the river on a new active transportation bridge, so bicycle pedestrian bridge over the river, going along the Water Street extension up Linden Alley, hopping onto a gravel trail on this portion, and then transitioning to along the edges of the parking lot, and then the gravel trail, the local bridge, and then shared facilities on these roadways. This is the second long-term concept. You'll see that these concepts have a lot of the same, let's say, legs being used. So that is something to take into consideration. We noted in our report that we believe that if the implementation plan, if the strategy is to implement it in certain ways, you can kind of mix and match these legs, right, with the different concepts. So you'll see this very last one is a combination of the first two. You've got the new bridge over the river, along these roadways, up along the gravel, along the parking lots, and then up and along the river there. So those are the three long-term concepts. Any questions on those three concepts there? Yeah, go for it, Ed.
Sorry, I had a little trouble getting on, but going back to that short-term concept, the one that goes on the gravel roadway and then goes to the bridge that's closed, temporarily closed, the short-term concept. How is the property for that set up? Is that, I believe that's the city owns that, or would they go along with? That seemed like the simplest approach, especially short-term.
Yeah, so in our recommendations, and this is a really great point in question. So that is a city-owned bridge, and part of these recommendations for the short-term concepts include a note to perform or pursue funding to perform, right, a bridge inspection of that local bridge to assess if there's any need, right, to move that forward. As you noted, it is currently closed to traffic. There is a temporary bridge on top. Let me grab that picture. There we go.
Yeah, that was, yeah.
So if I zoom in over here, you can see it is currently, as you see, has a road closed to through traffic, but there is a temporary bridge facility put on top. So in order to implement these short-term concepts, there would be a little work of the bridge inspection, right, just to make sure that it's good to go to carry the active traffic over it. Good question, Ed.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments, concerns, or any of the concepts that we've presented today? All right, then I'll close by saying the final, let's say, There is no final recommendation for this project. The way that we've left it is that here are all of the concepts that are on the table that have been vetted through the stakeholder team. Here are the considerations you would need for them. Here's the high level planning level cost estimates for each of them. And here are the next steps for implementation to move any of those forward. This will provide the local trail groups, the counties, the cities, with the ultimate flexibility to move forward in the way that makes the most sense for them. So just know that that is the approach that we've chosen to take with this report. All right. Any questions about that before we jump to our next part of the project, which is over in Conneaut Lake Borough? Any other questions on the Meadville extension? All right, we'll jump to that one then. All right, so once again, I'll give a quick high-level summary of the report so that you know what's in there, what resources are going to be available once this is finalized and published and up and out there. Then I will walk through the concepts that we've put together. So you will see it's a very similar layout in that we start with the introduction, the background of the project, some lovely maps to show where we're talking about. We include a summary of the data collection, a summary of the stakeholder team involvement, the public involvement process that we followed, and then it dives into the existing conditions. Once again, runs through land use context, trail context, gives some details on the trails in the area, identifies some key destinations, both in Conneaut Lake Borough as well as Linesville Borough. In addition, we run through the roadway context in both Conneaut Lake Borough as well as Linesville Borough. And we provide some context on some bridges that are in the area, as well as some environmental context and the property boundaries and the safety data and observations. You'll see very similar, right, to the Meadville extension report. In addition to that, we've summarized the survey results, what we've heard from all of you, and then we dive into those conceptual alternatives. All right, so for the conceptual alternatives, for this project, we have two groupings once again. We have what we're calling the route concepts, which will connect Conneaut Lake Borough to Linesville Borough. And then we also have what we're calling crossing concepts. And those are concepts on how to get the trail from this area across Water Street or US 322 over to Ice House Park. So first, we're going to talk about just the route concepts. So these are the high-level overarching routes to connect Conneaut Lake Borough to Linesville, and then we'll jump into the crossing. So first, the routes. So the three route concepts that we have are shown here on the screen. You can see the bright green route that is there is the on-road route. So this is choosing lower volume, relatively lower speed roadways, so roadways that have lower bicycle stress rate, and putting on-road facilities there. We have in that bright blue, turquoisey color, an off-road combo with the along the railroad concept. And then there's that dark blue, kind of a cobalt right color, which is an off-road and along property lines. That area. So those are the three concepts. I'm going to walk through in a little more detail what each of those entails. So for the on-road concept, it would follow up along from Fireman's Beach, up Aldina Drive, turn onto Pine Tuning. There would be a short segment that would be sort of a gravel trail along the roadway segment up to Louderman Drive. Then there would be a short gravel section from Louderman up to Keene Road. And then it would be along Keene Road, Alter/Porter Drive, right, up to Garreton Road, and then down Town Line Road to connect in to the Spillway Trail extension. So that is what this on-road concept would look like. Along those on-road segments, it would be a shared roadway facility. So in this case, it would likely be primarily share the road signage, right? Bicycle may use full lane signs and maybe some narrower segments of roadway, but because of the lower volumes and relatively lower speeds, that is the recommended approach for that one. right. The next route concept that we're going to walk you through is the off-road and along the railroad concept. So this one runs along the abandoned rail line coming out of Fireman's Beach, goes along up to here, and then catches up and would run alongside the active rail line. And then would jump onto Conley Road, this teeny tiny little road, to jump up, run along some of the old railroad line, and then connect into the Spillway Trail extension. So that is sort of the path there. These would be generally, as you see, off-road gravel path facilities between Conneaut, Lake Borough, and the Linesville Spillway Trail extension. Right. And the last one. The last one is the off-road and along property lines. This is probably the most, let's say, direct route. It would follow along the abandoned rail line. Then it would follow along property lines, off-road, gravel, right? Jump onto Keene Road for a small segment, be sort of a shared roadway facility in that segment. Then it would become a gravel route along the property lines, jump onto Canal Road, once again, gravel along the property, then back onto shared, and then gravel up to connect into the Spillway Trail. So those are the three route concepts that we have put together. Are there any questions on those route concepts that we've got going on here? Questions from the group?
Hello, this is Ed.
Yeah, go for it, Ed.
Oh, I'm just curious, when we have the option, the routes that go through property lines, do we have an idea of how many property owners would have to agree for easements to make that happen?
It's a great question. I don't have the number available, but we do have some of the screenshots right there from the property boundaries in that area that we could pull. But there would be a significant number for that off-road facility. Right? You can see, even just visually looking, if we zoom in, right, you can generally see some of the, let's say, property differences. You can see the property boundaries there. So a decent number for that.
Okay, that makes it hard. It would just take one person to not agree, and then it's kind of ruined. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's one of the considerations that we definitely include, right? As an implementation next step, the first step would be starting those conversations to assess, right, what the needs would be. That will inform, obviously, how feasible this particular one. Compare it to the on-road one with only a small portion of that off-road, relatively significantly less negotiation happening there. Pros and cons, right?
Right, yeah. I have another question too. For DCNR grants, it seems to be priority for gap trails that connect existing trails. I'm not sure, does it help us much when we connect to the Spillway Trail? I'm not sure where it goes or what the potential is for the Spillway Trail to go further. It seems like they're kind of looking for north-south routes for the highest priority for the gap trails.
It's a great question. So the Spillway Trail obviously connects into Pymatuning State Park, right? And right now the Spillway Trail extension then is planned to continue down into this area. And then that's where our connection would be coming in. There is a southern portion, another trail that is a part of Pymatuning State Park that is the Erie Extension Canal Towpath Trail, right? If we look at where we're connecting in, many of the facilities get us within striking distance of that next one, that it would make it relatively easy to then connect as well down. So this sort of provides an additional, gets you closer to both of those. Yeah. It's a good question.
Okay.
My understanding is there are plans for Ernst Trail to provide some connections in as well, which then also is that sort of north, south, east, west, right, connection. Right. Any other questions about the route concept? All right, then we will move along to the crossing concepts. So we have two crossing concepts that we've put together as part of this project. The segment of roadway that we are talking about, let me zoom up to the roadway context area, is this portion here in downtown Conneaut Borough, right, and moving into Salisbury Township, between First Street, Ice House Park, and the Conneaut Cellars Winery and Distillery, right? So essentially, how do we get folks from this area across and up to connect into the parks, right? The Ice House Park to Fireman's Beach up to those segments. So this is the sort of existing context. If we look at this portion of 322 closer to First Street, has a slightly smaller or less wide roadway width, right? It's shown here in the little X, right? And then if you go further down, closer to the cellar and winery and Silver Shores restaurant, right? The roadway widens up. We've got lanes being added on and two-way left turn lane opening up. So it's a relatively wide roadway. The two concepts that we put together for this section takes advantage of that additional roadway width and recommends some changes to that. So let me jump into those two crossing alternatives. So the two crossing concepts that we have along 322, we have the first one is putting a two-way separated bicycle facility on the southern side of the roadway, running from that segment from the Cellar Winery down to First Street, and then transition to the sidewalk, crossing at the signal, and then you're at the park. The second concept puts bicycle lanes on either side of the roadway and involves a mid-block crossing. And we'll talk through that. There's some pros and cons. We've heard from PennDOT that second concept is not the preferred concept, but we wanted to make sure and include it so that it's sort of walked through the two different options. So let's start first with the crossing concept, number one. So essentially, let me zoom in so we've got a little bit of better graphic here. As I noted, this would be a two-way bicycle facility on the southern side of the roadway. We would recommend that the lane widening, so where it opens up into two lanes in each direction, pushed further to the east. Recommend lowering or extending that 25 miles per hour further to the east as well. And essentially, trail users would hop on in this segment, travel along that southern side of the roadway, and then as you get to the intersection, they would be then diverted back onto the sidewalk, where then they would cross as pedestrians at the signal. Obviously, in this segment, there would need to be really thoughtful designs for the intersections. Those are not shown in the graphic, but it's noted as something that will absolutely need to be part of the next step, let's say, for design moving forward. But essentially, this is concept number one. All right. Concept number two. I apologize. Concept number one, also, we've got some graphics on what the roadway would look like, right? That type of typical section in that area. All right. Crossing concept number two. This one, once again, involves bicycle lanes on either side of the roadway and a mid-block crossing about 1,000 feet down from the signal lights intersection at First Street. As noted, and our representatives have shared that this is not the preferred concept. We've noted that in the report. We did want to include it just so that it's there. But essentially, it's same recommendations of pushing the lane, adding further to the east, extending the 25 mile per hour rate. And essentially, the trail users would either cross, right, to get to the other side, or travel along this area in the bike lanes. And that is essentially it. So the mid-block crossing treatment would look something like what's shown in this picture here. I'll zoom in a little bit. This is the concept of what that could look like, right? Having some sort of median, having some sort of overhead warning signage, right? delineated crosswalk with paint markings, right? High visibility markings. That's sort of the idea for that one. All right. Any questions or comments on those two crossing concepts?
Yes, Jennifer, I have a question.
Sure.
You've now repeated twice what I heard Lindsay say at our last meeting, that virtually no one in PennDOT would agree with or support a crosswalk at the winery. Correct me if I'm wrong, you're not going to actually put a recommendation in this phase of this study for one crossing point versus another. You're simply laying it out as an option. Are you going to document that there's a belief that no one in PennDOT supports this?
So the way that we phrase it, so let me first address the first part of your question. We are not making a recommendation between the two concepts. Just like in the Meadville extension and like we did for the routes, we're simply laying out all the options on the table, right, and leaving it open from there. The way that we've captured the comments that we heard, yes, from Lindsay and from others in PennDOT, is in this phrasing here. So essentially the note says, installation of a mid-block crossing and shifting of the lane transition is not currently a preferred option by PennDOT District 1 due to the traffic operations impacts, right? This is the way that we've chosen to capture this. But you are correct, Bill, that we are not making a recommendation. We're simply providing that.
Yeah, it's my feeling, especially after seeing this draft study and talking to people, local folks, that I think there is a fair amount of support for that option, which would merit at least some additional study. And I understand that we're going to be looking at what are the issues dealing with one version versus the other. But I was just concerned that we don't rule it out right at the outset up front, and that you've convinced me we're not going to do that. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right. Well, those are the two study reports that we are going to be forwarding along. And before I get ahead of myself here, let me jump to my slides. All right, so next steps for these projects, we have our two final reports for each of them. We will be sending them along to the Northwest Commission's Transportation Advisory Committee, the TAC, for them to review in advance of their June 28th meeting. We will then be on that meeting talking about the reports that we've put together, the concepts that we've put together, and fielding any questions that they may have. So that's sort of next steps for that. The hope is that upon reviewing that, there's an approval, and then those reports will then be finalized and posted to the website, right, for the project, as well as shared with the stakeholder teams for that. Any questions about the next steps for this?
Hi, this is Ed. Just that presentation to the Northwest RPO, that's just you folks, the stakeholders aren't involved in that? We're not going to that meeting?
Travis, correct me if I'm wrong, the meeting is open to the public, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah,
more
so
than welcome to attend, but
Yeah.
yeah, we leave it up to the Baker team to present.
Yeah, so Ed, if you'd
Okay,
like to
then-
attend, please feel free.
Then after that, we have a meeting with our groups.
Well,
A-
so we
after-
actually, yeah, it's a great question. So we actually are not scoped to do any other work past the end of that presentation. So that is sort of the end of the project for our involvement. So that is it, right? Other meetings could be held and coordinated to keep it moving forward, and I would definitely recommend that happen. But as far as our project team being involved, that's the end of our engagement. We'll hand it off to all of you to continue moving it forward.
Okay. I guess I picture a meeting with the Crawford County Planning Commission at least after this to talk all this over before we, start to plan how to move ahead. Okay.
I think that sounds like a prudent next step for sure. All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns for the good of all? All right. Well, with that, thank you all so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you coming out to hear about the final concepts that we put together for each of these projects. It's been a joy to be able to work with all of you on this, and we're really looking forward to seeing where this goes from here. So keep in the loop. We'll keep you updated as we present to the TAC, and keep that website updated with the final report. So with that, thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your evening. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.